Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, I'd like to talk to you about Airbnb's strategy and business model. Why? Well, it has two important reasons to it. Firstly, because Airbnb kind of single-handedly disrupted the travel industry in general, but in specific as well, the hotel industry. And secondly, because Airbnb's market value is off the charts, and we came to understand this when only recently it went to the stock market with an initial public offering where it offered basically its stocks to the investors, and they reciprocated this with this market value that's immense. In this video, basically what I would like to underscore and the question that I would like to answer with you is how it has been possible that this relatively young company disrupted this massive travel/hotel industry and has been able to surpass some of the biggest companies on the globe, such as hotel chains like Hilton and Marriott. So without any further ado, let's jump into the topic. First of all, the essential question that we have to start off with is, what is Airbnb? So Airbnb is this online marketplace, or in other words, this platform where travelers basically can find a place to stay. And normally when I say this, what should come to your mind are hotels, right? And interestingly, the Airbnb platform does also offer hotels. But if you're really after a hotel, if you're really thinking about, or if you're really certain that you want to stay in a hotel, then most likely Airbnb is not the company nor the platform that you're thinking of. Most likely you're thinking of Booking.com, or you're thinking of Expedia, two well-known platforms for hotel offerings, or you're thinking about Hilton, Marriott, and comparable hotel chains. And it's not that strange that you're not thinking about Airbnb, because Airbnb is well known for a different reason than hotels. Airbnb became especially well known because ordinary individuals would be able to rent out their places, their accommodation via this platform. Basically, what Airbnb did is, if you have an accommodation, and it doesn't kind of matter what type of accommodation is, you can open it up to travelers and earn money from your accommodation. What this essentially boils down to is that anybody, basically anybody, with a proper accommodation can transform him or herself into a hotel manager and their accommodation into a hotel via the Airbnb platform. So how does Airbnb earn money from this? Well, it has basically two sources of income. One is that it gets a commission from the host of the accommodation, and the secondly is that it charges a fee to whoever wants to rent the accommodation. So at this point, perhaps the question that comes to mind is, okay, but what type of stuff can I find on the Airbnb platform? Well, basically, you can find any type of accommodation, right? So I already briefly touched upon hotels. I'll be getting to that back in a second. But the most basically well-known types of accommodations other than hotels are entire homes, cabins, cottages, tree houses, bungalows, and so much more that I haven't written down the names of on my list. So one important thing that oftentimes comes to people's minds when you're talking about basically the income model of Airbnb is security. So why? Well, if you think about a hotel is kind of this trusted institution, right? Because they have been around for such a long time. You kind of know how they work, institutionalized organizations. But if you think about Airbnb, where basically anybody can become a hotel manager and basically any property can become an accommodation, then the questions coming to mind is how to agree with strangers staying in your accommodation. How are you going to agree with this as a host? How are you going to have peace of mind and peace of heart? And of course, if you look at it from the point of view of a traveler, then how are you going to agree with staying in this accommodation of a stranger, right? And so where is the security and the comfort that comes from staying in a hotel? Well, Airbnb wants the host, first of all, to feel secure. So they have kind of thought about this, which is very interesting. So as the host of an Airbnb accommodation, you can ask for the ID of a traveler that comes to your accommodation, so you can actually check who this person is, and you can of course screen based on this ID. Secondly, you can impose rules to travelers, and people who don't want to stick to these rules, you can basically reject as a traveler, something that oftentimes you cannot do if you are managing a hotel. Thirdly, you can ask from the guest a message before the guest arrives, and that way actually getting some peace of mind that you may be looking for. Fourthly, you can screen travelers based on their track record. So a traveler on the Airbnb platform is also being judged by the Airbnb host, right? By the accommodation. So if a traveler is, a good person, if treated, he or she treated the accommodation well, then of course the host can also give a positive review to the traveler, something oftentimes at hotels you don't see. And this way, the next property host basically can see whether the traveler is a good one or a bad one. And based on this, again, can make the call to reject the traveler or not. Going on, Airbnb kind of insures the hosts for quite a respectable sum of money in case things go astray. And finally, Airbnb promises that you can have a 24/7 connection to their host service if you wish. So the same story kind of also counts for guests. So as a guest, you can look at, for example, the risk scoring of a venue, and this scoring Airbnb basically gives to accommodations, to properties, and you can see whether it's a risky accommodation or not. Secondly, you can look at ratings and reviews, and of course these at the Airbnb platform are coupled to the ID. So it's very trustworthy, because if you don't stay at an accommodation, you cannot rate and you cannot write a review. And at the same time, of course, the property, the accommodation is actually checking whether this person is a legit person. Only at that point does the property have to accept someone. And so this also takes away a lot of uncertainty regarding the accommodation. Thirdly, there are watch lists, there are background checks that you can look at and that you can take into account as a traveler. Fourthly, Airbnb offers, for example, free carbon monoxide detectors to properties that desire them, and so in this way, actually, Airbnb helps accommodations to become safer than they already are, and this way to help basically improve their risk scoring. Finally, for guests, Airbnb offers this guest refund policy, just like there's a policy for hosts as well. So should things go wrong and that are basically within this guest refund policy, then you as an Airbnb guest will get your money back, and perhaps even will get compensated for some harm, financial, monetary harm that you were done. So, we talked kind of about the accommodation that Airbnb is offering and the security that comes with it, and how Airbnb is kind of trying to solve that. But interestingly, Airbnb has some very targeted services on top of the accommodation that I just talked about. So it's not just offering all sorts of accommodation in the same way to everybody. No, through certain targeted services, it's trying to basically supply those accommodations to those target markets, to those segments that will appreciate them the most and that perhaps may want to pay a premium for them. So there's Airbnb Plus, basically, at which you can find higher quality homes and services, and Airbnb selects these places that deserve to be Airbnb Plus through reviews and through their own assessment. Then you have Airbnb Luxe, which basically boils down to Airbnb Luxury. And this is basically something that comes on top of Airbnb Plus, where you are eligible for tailored services, where you are eligible for airport shuttles, where there are amenities on top of the amenities that you would normally find in Airbnb accommodation. So it really aims there to give you more of a luxurious feel that you normally would perhaps have at the hotel, and may also be looking for when you're basically looking for a property or an accommodation on Airbnb. So very interesting is this third service that I would like to talk to you about, which is this business that Airbnb acquired, and that's called HotelTonight. So I told you at the start of this video that on Airbnb as a platform you can also find hotels. Especially HotelTonight is the side business of Airbnb, this business it acquired, through which it is offering basically stays at hotels. The interesting thing is, of course, also understandable from the name. It's a same-day hotel deal where you can basically book a hotel room in the same day. So it appeals to people who are more flexible and are after more cheap deals as a compensation for their flexibility. So of course the benefit to hotels as well, because rooms that they could not have booked, this way they can still, as a last minute option, can still offer to people. So through HotelTonight, basically, Airbnb is saying, hey, hotel industry, I'm also here offering hotel stays, so watch out. And so it has, if you couple all of this to each other, Airbnb has this general offering, right, where it is basically offering accommodation to everybody without any segmentation. Then it has Airbnb Plus, and then on top of that Airbnb Luxe, so the luxurious version. And then it has something separate, which is especially tailored towards people who are interested in hotels. And then for that specific reason, it acquired this business called HotelTonight, where it is offering these same day hotel deals. So a lot about accommodation, but perhaps interesting to know is that Airbnb does go beyond just offering places, does go beyond just offering accommodation, because on Airbnb you can also rent experiences. And so what does this mean? Well, this basically means that you can hire basically the services of expert guides, and their services can be of all sorts, right? They can give you this city tour, they can play games with you, they can whatever comes to your mind. There's these expert guides on different areas, of course, tailored to travel, tailored to the location where you're going, and you can basically make use of their services through this experience segment of the Airbnb platform. This experience sharing can be physical, right? Especially in normal times when you would really physically travel much more, then you may want to make use of this to wander around musea, theaters, whatever, and you may want a guide to really show you where you need to go to. But especially neat for COVID-19 times is also the option to make use of online services of these guides. So taking all of this forward, bundling it all together. So looking at all of this, why is Airbnb so massive as a business, and why is the Airbnb platform so revolutionary and disruptive? So firstly, Airbnb, as said, is this matchmaking platform, right? And so this basically means that Airbnb does not hold any assets, and in that sense it's basically different than hotels. Airbnb is coordinating and organizing demand and supply of accommodation, and so it doesn't have the maintenance costs nor the depreciation costs that hotel chains have. On top of this, of course, not holding any of those physical assets enables Airbnb to scale super fast. And so basically this boils down to, if Airbnb wants to expand, the only thing that needs to happen is that people are just going to put their accommodation on the Airbnb platform. If Airbnb is not in a certain country, but someone there gets interested in the Airbnb platform, puts their accommodation on Airbnb, then automatically Airbnb has expanded to that area. It does not have to make this massive investment, does not have to build something over there, does not have to hire people in that country. No, the only thing that needs to happen is someone listing their accommodation in a certain place on the Airbnb platform. And with that, Airbnb is able to expand so fast, which basically explains why Airbnb is already active in over 191 countries all over the world. So the second reason why Airbnb is so massive is because Airbnb as a platform has, massively increased the variety of places that you can find as a traveler to stay at. Basically, any property type that comes to your mind, any type of accommodations is eligible for listing. And with this, of course, as variety goes up, so does go up the variety of design and location. So places where you would normally find hotels, they're kind of limited, restricted, they're kind of clear where you're able to find hotels. But an Airbnb accommodation, you can find basically anywhere. You can find it on a cliff, you can find it on a mountain range, you can find it wherever. Wherever is a building, there can be an Airbnb accommodation in potential. And having this variety in types of accommodation also leads to a variety in pricing, meaning that basically with Airbnb, what came to happen is that prices started to drop a lot for people who especially wanted to travel in an economic fashion. So because all sorts of properties got listed on Airbnb, of course, you got massive competition. There are much less amounts of hotels, and so the competition among hotels is much less than is the competition among Airbnb accommodation. And if there's competition, then the accommodation gets into this price war. They're trying to competitively price each other, and with that you saw that in general prices decreased. But also because you have this large variety of accommodation, you especially also get a large variety at the bottom end of the sector, right? The luxurious part of the sector of the travel industry, there are also hotels, and so there's already a lot of competition over there. But especially at the bottom end of the travel industry, you suddenly saw a lot of offerings for a very cheap price. And so if you wanted to travel cheaply, then Airbnb suddenly became the place for you. Especially also with this variety of accommodation came the variety in design. The accommodation did not always have to be 5-star, 4-star. It can also be this relatively simple place. And if you want that, if you want a relatively simple travel, then there would be this place for you. Also, of course, Airbnb does not pay for hotel-related costs, so the costs they save from that, they can, of course, use for suppression of the offerings on the Airbnb platform. And so it eventually resulted in the Airbnb commissions that they charge basically from hosts of properties, and them being much lower than, for example, a Booking.com would charge their hotels on their platform. So the third reason why Airbnb is so massive is because it's quite diversified, contrary to what most people think. So if you think of Airbnb, I kind of already told you that they have this general offering, but then they have this plus, right? Airbnb Plus, then they have this Airbnb Luxe, right? Airbnb Luxury, basically. So these are already 3 different offerings on the general Airbnb accommodation part of the business. But on top of this, what I just told you also is that in Airbnb there are hotels, but then they also acquired this special business called HotelTonight that clearly launches a statement and an offense towards hotel chains, saying that I have this business that's specifically focused on hotel chains as well. So then you see that there are especially 4 different types of offerings on the Airbnb platform, basically appealing to 4 different groups of travelers. And this, of course, comes with a variety of customers, and with that, as we basically see in the growth of Airbnb, it comes in terms of the size of the business over the course of time. So the final point that I would like to talk to you about in this category of the video is that Airbnb is quite aggressive in its growth, and this also helped in making Airbnb the massive company it is. It, for example, nailed this sponsorship for the Olympics and it has this deal that's going to go all the way until 2028. And basically with this, again, it makes a statement in the travel industry saying that if you need an accommodation, the Airbnb platform is there for you. We will offer you basically whatever you want. Bringing all of this together, essentially what Airbnb did is it downgraded the centrality of hotels to travel. Travel no longer is equal to staying in a hotel, and that's basically what Airbnb achieved. Secondly, Airbnb disrupted the income model of hotels because anybody can turn into a hotel manager with their own accommodation also being in hotel, right? With much less rules, regulations, and with much less of bureaucracy. And thirdly, Airbnb opened up the income pie of travel to basically anyone with a demandable accommodation, and it made this industry so much more accessible, and with this, of course, increased the threat of entry to the hotel industry, but in general to the travel industry as well. So is it all nice and great for Airbnb? Of course not. So there are certain issues that they really are struggling with and that they really have to think about in going forward. First of all, Airbnb, as said, has two ways in which it makes money, right? Especially through its normal platform, which is firstly, it charges a fee to whoever rents the place, and then on top of this, it also charges a commission to the host of the accommodation. And so normally speaking, charging a commission, that's what most platforms do, but that you also then have the service charge to whoever rents the accommodation. This is kind of something that disturbs the consumer. It's especially psychologically something that you'd rather not want. You would rather just have the price and then this fee being kind of covered up as part of the commission that you would charge to the host. Of course, the benefit here is that the commission to the host can be lower, and with this you can have much more property on the Airbnb platform, and you can have much more competition, which hopefully will lead to a decrease in prices on the platform. But still, it is something to think about. If Airbnb can get this done and over with, I think it would be a big plus from at least the traveler's point of view. The second point, we talked already a bit about it, security. So a sense of security is much higher at the hotel, especially the higher the stars of the hotel are. As much as Airbnb tries to do some stuff to get the host and the traveler to get a sense of security, still you kind of always feel that the hotel is the more secure option, and this will lead to people preferring one over the other. Then there's this other issue that we need to talk about, which is these other platforms like Booking.com that are kind of battling here with Airbnb as well, and they are kind of trying to offer the same things. Booking.com, for example, offering mainly hotels, but has also started to move into alternative accommodation. Yes, the emphasis on somewhere different, but it does move into the same area that Airbnb is doing, and then the question is, how sustainable is the advantage that you have accumulated over the course of time as an Airbnb? How strong is your reputation and your advantages going to be? A benefit of Airbnb over Booking.com is that Airbnb has much more security checks, and that it has this track record check that you can do for whoever travels, right? You can check whether the traveler actually was a decent person, and then this ID check also you cannot do on Booking.com. But on the other side, because Booking.com is predominantly offering hotel rooms, at least the ID check and the security checks are less needed because the hotel does those checks anyway. So this competition is a tough competition that needs to taken seriously. Fourthly, hotel chains are also, of course, not just saying, hey, Airbnb, take all our money, take all our market share, and that's it. No, they're trying to launch counterattacks to Airbnb. Marriott launched this service called Homes and Villas, and Accor added this business to its company called One Fine Stay. And so both hotel chains basically added this alternative accommodation business to their main business. It's mainly tailored towards the luxury segment, but still they are slowly moving into the more general accommodation offering and trying to get a part of the pie that Airbnb kind of has gotten most of the part of. Problem here for the hotel chains is that the Airbnb customer is more loyal. At least the figures show this, and this of course boils down to the Airbnb customers getting a higher pay, and their customers being retained much more. So why are Airbnb customers more loyal? To short talk about that, it's a much more warmer way of traveling. Hotels kind of are experienced as being much more cold. It's just this transaction that you do, but at Airbnb, because it's kind of this home, sometimes the homeowner is also still around, it gives you a much warmer way of traveling, which of course leads to more loyalty. So what can the hotel chain do? Of course, have a warmer way of receiving people, but of course you can also try to innovate in your loyalty schemes and trying to have incentives for people to come back to your hotel. There are already some in place, but they don't really work. They're old-fashioned, outdated, so then serious innovation here is needed. The final point here in terms of the issues that Airbnb is facing is regulation. A lot of regulation kind of was slow in adapting to Airbnb as a platform, and then you saw that Airbnb was really able to grow fast without kind of having to deal with any proper regulation. But now you see that cities are restricting how long someone can rent their place via Airbnb. You see that there are going to be caps on how many buildings in a city or in a country are basically on the Airbnb platform. You see EU level regulations even coming up, because Airbnb has led to a tourist problem, like too many tourists and too many types of tourists that you perhaps may not want as a city or a country or a region. And then of course there's also the lack of accommodation increasingly, because people are not anymore selling their property, not anymore renting it, but they're Airbnb-ing it, because they can get much more income from this. And then cities, countries, regions are trying to deal with this through regulation. And Airbnb, of course, needs to anticipate on this, take these threats seriously, and perhaps work with officials in making all of this work better. So this final point that I'd like to talk to you about is the Airbnb IPO. So the initial public offering of its shares on the stock exchange to, of course, get funding from this, to be able to grow faster, to be able to do investments, and of course to also get this proper market valuation from the stock market. So at the IPO time, Airbnb was priced at $68 a share, but then it flew up all the way to $144 a share. And so then the question is, of course, how was this possible? Why did the stocks more than double in value? Well, this is kind of all accumulated energy and frustration with respect to COVID-19. The travel market was hit, and all players kind of were hit by the pandemic, because people could not travel, and so the travel industry could not make their income. Costs were kind of still around. So basically what you saw is that income dropped, but with that costs kind of staying the same led to an increase in losses. And so Airbnb had to fire 25% of its workforce, raise $2 billion from private equity companies to survive, basically. And hotel companies might have been hit even harder, because they have more costs, more maintenance, more depreciation, more employees working. And of course their pricing is also much higher, so they get more money, one may say, from each listing. So and sector hit so hard, and where investors could not invest anymore in, they were of course waiting for the moment to invest in this company, in this business that would benefit from a recovery in the travel market. And the more news comes out around vaccines, the more news comes out around decreasing deaths, around cases coming down, right? COVID-19 cases, around increase of demand for travel and holidays. The more all of this happens, of course, the more investors are going to pour money in businesses and stocks related to travel. And Airbnb kind of came around in that sweet spot where vaccines kind of started to come to the market, and where investors were gaining renewed interest in travel companies. And so the question is, have investors not been too optimistic too soon? Well, after hitting $144 a share, Airbnb's stocks in only 4 days decreased all the way until $125 per share only. And so Airbnb was at its max worth around $100 billion. Now only $74 billion of that is left. It is still way more than Hilton with a $29 billion and Marriott with a $42 billion combined, which is crazy. Airbnb is so young, not holding the physical assets, and by no means having the income of Hilton and Marriott is still worth more than both combined. And what about that other platform, Expedia? Well, it's only worth $18 billion. And Airbnb is worth 4 times as much. But as said, Airbnb's income is way lower than its competitors, which raises the question, is this a bubble? Or should you keep on investing in Airbnb? Well, investors are investing in the future. The question is whether Airbnb is going to be able to keep up this pace of growth and whether it's going to be able to fend off attacks. And if you think it's going to be able to do exactly that, then just keep on investing. Airbnb's business model is solid. It does diversify. It does not just stay where it is. And it's a very, very strong company. But think for yourself, is this not a bit too much? Are the vaccines really going to have their effect so soon? And are these competitors moving kind of in the direction that Airbnb is moving? Are they not going to harm Airbnb? And so is it not too much that we're paying for an Airbnb stock? I think both sides have good arguments. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe buttons. I wish you all the best in the world and hope to see you anytime soon again. Take care.